Good afternoon. The hearing on Committee on Homeland Security Oversight will now come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the subcommittee in recess at any point. And let's begin by thanking everyone today for joining us. Over the last few months, this subcommittee has had the opportunity to look closely at some of the factors that push people from Central America and Mexico to leave their homes and travel to the United States border. We've heard about crippling effects of the recent natural disasters, widespread poverty, COVID-19, as well as the pervasive presence of corruption, which stifles progress, economic progress, and maintains inequality. And today, I look forward to diving more deeply into some of these issues the Department of Homeland Security is working on to combat both abroad and at home, primarily violence and instability caused by transnational criminal organizations. These TCOs are far-reaching criminal enterprises that seek to profit from a wide variety of illicit schemes, including drug trafficking, smuggling, migrants, money laundering, and extortion. Their activities affect migration at almost every level. These TCOs are often connected to the local gangs that spread violence and fear in Central America, providing the weapons and legitimacy that allows these gangs to continue preying on the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. This is particularly true in the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, which have some of the highest homicide rates in the world and where this violence is disproportionately directed towards women and girls. The extortion, kidnapping, and threat of violence perpetrated by these gangs is one of the main reasons why people leave their homes and go north. Additionally, TCOs are typically either directly connected to the groups that smuggle migrants across the borders or will allow the smugglers to pass through their territory they control for a fee, generating, of course, millions of dollars a year from the exploitations of those who seek a better life. And for many who hope to escape violence by leaving their homes, the journey can be as perilous. It's estimated that about 80% of the women and girls who migrate from the Northern Triangle face sexual violence along the way. And migrants are also highly susceptible to robbery and, of course, kidnapping. And the same connections that allow TCOs to guarantee passage free from legal hassle also allow them to victimize migrants with impunity. Therefore, key to success of President Biden's efforts to slow irregular migration will have to be a continued focus on the detection and disruption of these TCOs as their many illegal activities. We have with us today two witnesses from the Department of Homeland Security to outline how they are supporting the president's goal and how they are working to implement the president's goals. For years, the department has undertaken efforts to degrade and influence the influence of TCOs that have in foreign countries and at the border and even in the U.S. created such chaos. Customs and Border Protection utilizes a combination of personnel, technology, and information gathering to monitor the flows of goods and people across the border, while Immigration and Customs Enforcement seeks to investigate the crimes perpetrated by these TCOs and ensure prosecution both at home and abroad. Additionally, DHS participates in several interagency task forces that coordinate the TCO investigation efforts of DHS, the Department of Justice, and state and local law enforcement. Under the Biden administration, DHS will participate in two new interagency task forces to enhance enforcement efforts against human smuggling. And these are Operation Sentinel and Joint Task Force Alpha. These collaborations ensure that DHS is part of a unified effort to attack and dismantle these criminal organizations as quickly and as effectively as possible. And we must remember that in these nefarious and resilient criminal networks, we must remember who the real enemy is and not those that they leave behind in terrible situations. With that, I want to thank you for joining us today. And now I'd like to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Mayor, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today, and I look forward to having a frank and in-depth discussion with our witnesses. I hope we can delve into the reality of the situation in the Northern Triangle and get a better sense of the threat that these transnational criminal organizations, or TCOs, as the chairman mentioned, pose to the region and how they are fueling the exodus of families and civilians across our southern border. While this is the third hearing that our subcommittee has held on the Northern Triangle region in an effort to better understand the range of push factors contributing to migration, this is the first one we've had with government witnesses. This allows us the chance to hear directly from CBP and HSI about the threat posed by TCOs in the area and the effect that they are having on citizens in those countries as they travel through Mexico and to our southern border. As I stated in the first hearing, this administration has compounded the problem at the border by failing to adequately dissuade those who seek to illegally cross. Although I do not fault those who seek a better life for their families, we now find ourselves in a border crisis where too many individuals and families have been making that choice to enter the U.S. illegally at the encouragement of the administration. On July 14th, we passed a threshold of over 1 million border crossings in the last fiscal year. There are many reasons why people in the Northern Triangle choose to migrate, and we've discussed those at length in previous hearings. But it's clear that many actions taken by the administration have resulted in this crisis. On June 15th, the administration provided an update on the actions that have been taken to improve the border crisis and highlighted a number of accomplishments, including a significant reduction in the number of unaccompanied children being held in Customs and Border Protection facilities. What that announcement failed to mention, however, is the issue has not been resolved. Just last month, we hit an unfortunate new record of over 15,000 unaccompanied minors who were encountered by CBP at the border. The bottleneck has simply been shifted from CBP to Health and Human Services and dispersed throughout the country, including in our 3rd Congressional District. HHS is now responsible for housing these unaccompanied minors. And in the first hearing on the topic that we held, the subcommittee heard from Sheriff Steve Hinckley of Calhoun County, Michigan, in our district, as he described the strain that the shift in administration policy has placed on local law enforcement and the lack of coordination and assistance provided by the federal government in enacting this new procedure. Unfortunately, there are instances of unaccompanied minors, as well as adults, arriving at our southern border as a result of human trafficking operations. I look forward to engaging with our witnesses today to learn more about their agency's efforts to combat criminal organizations in the region that conduct these operations and determine what additional resources DHS may need in order to prevent future humanitarian and security crises in the region. I'm hopeful we'll use this opportunity today to engage on specific strategies and potential solutions that Congress and the administration can pursue together in order to productively address these challenges in a responsible and effective way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, again for holding this hearing, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
And I thank the ranking member. Members are also reminded that the committee will operate according to the guidelines laid out by the chairman and ranking member in the February 3rd colloquy regarding remote procedures. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, which is not here, so we move on to the ranking member, also not here. Okay. Like to do is now move to welcoming our witnesses. First witness we have is Mr. Francis Russo. He's the Acting Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner for Operation Support at the Customs and Border Protection Office. In his role, he supports CBP operations across 8 subcomponents, including offices of intelligence, international affairs. Mr. Russo has served in multiple roles since joining Customs Service in 1995, including as Assistant Director for Border Security in the New York Field Office. And our second witness is Mr. John Condon. Mr. Condon is the Acting Assistant Director for Homeland Security Investigations, Internal Operations within Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He is responsible for 81 international offices in 53 countries, and his responsibilities include planning, directing, managing, and coordinating all policies, procedures, and guidelines concerning international investigative activities. He previously served in several roles, including ICE's Regional Attaché for the Caribbean. Without objection, the witnesses' full statements will be inserted to the record, and I now ask each witness to summarize their statements in 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. Russo. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, Chairman Correa, Ranking Member Mayor, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about transnational organized crime in Central America and U.S. Customs and Border Protection's efforts to dismantle it. As you are aware, transnational criminal organizations, or TCOs, are heavily involved in smuggling a combination of human beings, weapons, cash, or narcotics, essentially anything with a high profit margin. They operate seamlessly across international borders, exploiting supply chains, financial flows, corrupt officials, and overburden law enforcement without regard for human life. They pose a clear threat to national security and public safety. It's estimated that TCOs profit anywhere from $200 million to $2.3 billion alone for smuggling migrants from the Northern Triangle to the southwest border. Desperate migrants pay TCO-connected human smuggling groups thousands of dollars to aid on their journey to escape violence, natural disasters, food insecurity, and poverty at home. Smugglers control where these illegal border crossings occur, often abandoning migrants in remote and dangerous areas. Last month, CBP conducted 9,500 rescues in these areas and rescued 81% more individuals this year than last fiscal year. Unfortunately, we have also confirmed 300 deaths this year. This callous activity creates border security gaps that TCOs seek to exploit. While agents are busy processing large groups or rescuing migrants, TCOs move illicit narcotics or other contraband elsewhere across the border. CBP leverages key partnerships and sound analytics to combat TCOs. Joint Task Force Alpha, our newest initiative, includes partnerships with federal prosecutors along the southwest border, supported by law enforcement agents and analysts from ICE and CBP. The task force is enhancing the Department of Justice's ability to investigate and prosecute the most prolific and dangerous human smuggling and trafficking groups operating in Mexico and the Northern Triangle. Complementing Task Force Alpha, Operation Sentinel is a CBP-led initiative to counter TCOs affiliated with migrant smuggling. It is supported by ICE, USCIS, the U.S. Department of State, the U.S. DEA, and the FBI. The operation targets and disrupts those individuals responsible for sending structured payments facilitating human smuggling. We are mapping the networks while targeting their members, associates, and their assets. Examples include revocation of travel documents, suspension and debarment, and freezing of bank accounts and other financial assets tied to TCO logistical networks. To date, Operation Sentinel has yielded the revocation of more than 150 visas associated with TCO members and their associates, preventing these individuals from traveling to the United States or using their visas to enter foreign countries. In addition, our foreign partners have frozen overseas bank accounts, curbing the ability of TCOs to access the proceeds of their illicit activities. Operation Sentinel has identified multiple businesses for suspension or debarment, precluding those associated with TCOs and their affiliates from participating in federal programs. To support Operation Sentinel, CBP recently announced a partnership with the National Insurance Crime Bureau to prevent companies linked to migrant smuggling from securing insurance for their commercial enterprises. NICB's network of 1,200 companies includes more than 80% of the nation's property casualty insurance companies. Their partnership, combined with CBP's suspension and debarment program, protects the public interest, the public's money, and the integrity of federal programs by ensuring that federal agencies only conduct business with those engaged in lawful enterprise. Starting in June, CBP personnel deployed to Guatemala to provide advisory and capacity-building expertise to the government of Guatemala to improve border security efforts, target human smuggling groups, and enhance trade and customs modernization. The initiative, coordinated closely with the State Department's Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement, seeks to manage migration and a growing number of non-citizen, unaccompanied children transiting through and from Guatemala. In addition, CBP's National Targeting Center, known as the NTC in Sterling, Virginia, uses classified law enforcement, commercial, and open source information in innovative ways to identify high-risk travelers and shipments at the earliest point possible to mitigate threats at and beyond the border. The NTC collaborates closely with federal, state, and local partners, including HSI's Human Smuggling Unit, to dismantle special interest migrant facilitation networks, prioritized for action through ICE HSI's Extraterritorial Criminal Travel Program. Finally, the NTC actively participates in the Transnational Organized Crime Watchlisting Program, accounting for a large percentage of all U.S. government nominations to the program. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today. and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Now I'll call Mr. Condon to summarize his comments in 5 minutes. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Correa, Ranking Member Meyer, and distinguished members of this subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. Today, I will focus on the role U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Homeland Security investigations plays in identifying, disrupting, and dismantling transnational criminal organizations associated with the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. As a principal investigative component of the Department of Homeland Security, HSI conducts criminal investigations into the legal movement of goods, money, technology, people, and contraband into and out of and throughout the United States. HSI has more than 10,000 employees in over 200 cities nationwide and 81 locations around the world. In the Northern Triangle, HSI has attaché offices in Guatemala City, Guatemala, San Salvador, El Salvador, and Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Each of the Northern Triangle attaché offices also has a Transnational Criminal Investigative Unit, or TCIU, made up of foreign law enforcement, customs, and immigration officials and prosecutors who undergo a strict vetting process and complete robust training. HSI works with TCIU personnel to provide intelligence and resources to allow our partners to take enforcement actions under their country's authorities. The close relationship built by HSI's TCIU program have led to unique opportunities to share information with Northern Triangle law enforcement counterparts. Operation Gatehouse is an initiative that deploys TCIU officers from the Northern Triangle countries to the United States and to assist HSI offices and federal, state, and local partners with investigating MS-13 members. Pushing our borders out to address threats before they reach the United States is a priority for HSI. Through our Operation Citadel, HSI identifies, disrupts, and dismantles TCOs and terrorist support networks by targeting mechanisms used to move migrants, illicit funds, and contraband throughout the region. Citadel provides training and capacity building, including using cross-border operations to enhance foreign partners' investigative and information sharing capabilities. Through the Biometric Identification Transnational Migration Alert Program, also known as BITMAP, HSI trains and equips foreign law enforcement officers to collect biometric and biographic data on suspects of interest. Foreign law enforcement partners share their BITMAP information with HSI, and this data is used to populate U.S. databases to identify transnational criminals, known or suspected terrorists, and gang members, and prevent their travel to the United States. HSI's National Air Trafficking Initiative, or NATI, addresses the transportation of narcotics from source countries to the United States by air, which is the preferred method of smuggling by many Colombian and Mexican drug cartels. HSI disrupts these smuggling routes by shutting down the transshipment of cocaine through Guatemala and Belize. NATI has resulted in historic interdictions, arrests, and seizures, striking a serious blow to TCOs exploiting our nation's borders. To complement its international focus, HSI's efforts continue in our domestic field offices, where HSI special agents respond to and investigate criminal schemes that are encountered or identified in the United States. HSI special agents combat narcotic smuggling by launching complex criminal investigations to take down sophisticated networks that produce, transport, broker, finance, and sell and distribute drugs. HSI further disrupts TCO operations by identifying and seizing the significant currency and assets attained through their criminal activities. TCOs also require a steady supply of firearms and ammunition. HSI special agents investigate criminal organizations responsible for the financing, procurement, brokering, transportation, and dissemination of firearms in support of these TCOs. These efforts take weapons off our streets and prevent the smuggling of U.S. arms. HSI and its partners have dismantled pipelines used to smuggle undocumented non-citizens through Central and South America, seized millions of dollars from entities actively violating U.S. immigration and money laundering statutes, and dismantled networks of transportation and harboring cells that endanger undocumented non-citizens by exposure, abandonment, or unsafe transportation methods. Joint Task Force Alpha, JTFA, initiated by DOJ and launched with DHS, is a multi-agency operation to dismantle TCOs engaged in human smuggling from Mexico and/or through the Northern Triangle to the United States via the southwest border. HSI is a primary partner in JTFA and has identified dozens of smuggling organizations that have been designated as significant priority cases for this initiative. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today and for your continued support of HSI and the critical investigative role it plays in investigating the TCOs that facilitate and profit from our cross-border crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Condon. Thank our witnesses for their testimony. I'll remind the subcommittee that we each will have 5 minutes to question the panel, and I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes of question. First, question for both of you. The nature of these international TCOs has made it difficult to prosecute these networks. But really, it is crucial that those who violate U.S. laws are brought to justice. It is even more important that these individuals know that we are watching, and there will be a price to be paid should they violate our laws. What kind of jurisdictional authority do each of your components have to investigate and prosecute these TCOs that operate outside the United States? Mr. Russo.
Mr. Chairman, we couldn't agree with you anymore. That's where Operation Sentinel is a clear focus, because our efforts include the ability to work with our foreign partners to freeze bank accounts. And that's, getting right into their pockets.
So, Mr. Russo, let me interrupt you. Do we have the cooperation of our foreign partners
We do, sir.
to do so?
We do. Sir.
Mexico,
Absolutely.
El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. We are there. We just recently deployed staff, including intelligence analysts and officers and agents to Guatemala. Our first deployment was in June, where we sent 16 employees down there to work with the government of Guatemala to open up checkpoints, to conduct inspections. We've conducted, even in just the first month while we've been down there, over 7,000 inspections of individuals. We've identified 50 individuals that are engaging in human smuggling. So the
So if
efforts
you've
are there.
identified them, what next?
What's next is to turn them over. We've turned them over to the government of Guatemala for prosecution.
What about turning them over to the U.S. government for prosecution?
Well, I would imagine that those efforts, would have to continue in the future, but we're not there.
And the reason I say that, Mr. Russo, is that I'm of the belief that a foreign national who commits crimes is more concerned about ending up in a U.S. jail than they would in a jail in other parts of the world. And I think it's a bigger deterrent if you put them in our jails as it is to in a foreign jail.
We agree, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Condon, any thoughts?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I think for the HSI perspective, we do get very good cooperation from our partners. In fact, we do that primarily through our TCIU initiative, where we have vetted teams of law enforcement officials that we work very, very cohesively with. And just yesterday, our team in El Salvador arrested 3,200, or excuse me, in Honduras arrested 3,200 nationals for human smuggling violations.
3,200?
32
32.
32. That was the equivalent, and with that operation, what they're able to do with our TCIU is share that information rapidly. And when we do that, we can employ things like our biometrics bitmap program to share those biometrics with CBP immediately and all the partners to ensure that these folks are fully identified. We also exploit any kind of data rapidly through our TCIUs there in close partnership with our task force officers, and we're able then to build our investigations further from that standpoint. Without these individuals being in the United States, we can start and push that threat further out, and then start our investigation.
Gentlemen, you mentioned a number in terms of arrests. I think both of you said less than 100. So my question would be, is this enough to make a dent, or is this a drop in the bucket?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the operation that we alluded to is Operation Sentinel, and it just started in May. And so, we believe that that operation, as it unfolds and as the phases of that operation continue, we'll have some major successes.
Mr. Condon?
Yes, sir. And similarly, through the Joint Task Force Alpha, we've, with our partners such as CBP and Department of Justice, we've identified at least 20 cases or investigations to put under that umbrella for the large-scale, significant investigations that are being coordinated and ideally will be prosecuted here in the United States for the most impact, and that's being done through the Joint Task Force Alpha.
I'm out of time, but hopefully, with the consent of my members here, we'll do another round of questions. But my next question later on I will ask is, you've got Operation Alpha and Sentinel. Clearly, we've had other operations before. How are you coordinating, or how is the legacy of prior successes or lessons learned being incorporated into Alpha and Sentinel? and how are we essentially working across what I would call silos. Homeland Security is big. It was created 20 years ago to coordinate across government agencies. My concern is we're still operating under silos and that we haven't quite gotten there. So in the next round, I'm going to ask for you to address those questions. And if I can, I'll turn to our ranking member, Mr. Mayor, for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree wholeheartedly on seeking more strong criminal deterrence. Just briefly on that question of silos, I think we saw with when the DEA started to have that ability to engage in bringing back some of the narco traffickers in the late 80s and 90s to the U.S., a strong deterrent capability came in there, and clearly this is a human trafficking component, is a potentially multi-billion-dollar industry for a lot of these same organizations. It just, when we think about the scourge of drugs versus human smuggling and what that does at the border, I think we've been approaching that through two different lenses. But shifting to my question, directed specifically to Mr. Condon, sir, if you could provide just an overview briefly of HSI's TCIU, the Transnational Criminal Investigative Unit, just what it does, some of the challenges that are facing it today in carrying out its mission.
Thank you, sir. So the TCIU program is HSI's partnership with our host nation partners, where we bring along law enforcement officials or immigration and customs officials from each of these countries, especially the Northern Triangle. We vet them, we utilize polygraphs, we have a very intense training program that we bring into the United States. In Georgia, where we present the training, we also incorporate their prosecutors as part of this, or identify prosecutors to go through the similar sort of training capacity building. And through that, we also have them, we work with State Department and their and host nation to have them in a separate sort of facility, oftentimes away from their typical police headquarters. And they focus, largely speaking, on these crimes. And basically, we build their capacity, we help them to be able to investigate and interdict and prosecute these types of crimes in their home countries, but also, just as importantly, to share information with us appropriately, to pass information and leads back and support our domestic cases to is part of the goal to prosecute and dismantle these organizations largely here in the United States.
Yeah, so focusing on that training, having some segregation of office locations so that it's kind of clear there's a separate mission for them within their host nation country. But so I'm clear, you're not authorized to pay them directly.
No, sir. The only thing DOJ entities are allowed to pay salary stipends. However, DHS does lack that. So there are times where we do lose our officers because these officers are obviously the pay for these officers by their home countries is very, very low. So oftentimes other USG agencies are able to provide sort of salary stipends. So one of the things that does hamper us slightly there is or not slightly, but does hamper us is the inability to kind of mirror that.
And obviously, and I think it's smart to have that segregation of that office, but still, I could only imagine that transnational criminal organizations in a Northern Triangle country are able to exert tremendous influence, potentially within the government, but obviously offering financial remuneration otherwise. So is that a concern on that oversight of that potential for some of the individuals you're partnering with to obviously be under kind of clear threat, but also get
Yes, very much
taken
so.
off the mission?
Yes, very much so. We try to, in addition to the financial inducements, up their professional standards, the mission focus, and similar to what we, as best we can here in the United States. But definitely the financial inducements, it's a clear challenge.
And just shifting real quick, last week, actually in the same hearing room, we had an intelligence and counterterrorism subcommittee hearing about the use of cryptocurrency by TCOs in Central America, but also otherwise. Are you seeing any, this could go to either, are you seeing any challenges in terms of, you mentioned Operation Sentinel to debar businesses from federal contracts, to work with those insurance agencies. Any challenges of transnational criminal organizations that you've been seeing doing an end run around some of our financial money laundering or kind of other operations on the financial side by using cryptocurrency as an end run?
For the Northern Triangle, and just confirming with our offices there, we have not seen that to any great lengths in the Northern Triangle. We are seing that further downrange, if you will, in Colombia in other areas. But yes, in the Northern Triangle, no. However, we are taking steps to get ahead of that. We're incorporating training for our TCIUs. We've also funded very small, and it's in the nascent stages of small sort of cyber centers, one in Panama, one in Guatemala, to help sort of build capacity there in the cyber realm for these TCIUs and our host nation partners to try to at least get somewhat ahead of this curve. So when it does hit, it's only a matter of time. But and right now, not so prevalent in Latin America. Central America.
Thank you. And, again, strong partners here and looking to shore up any ways we can of finding ways in which our current approach is not as strong as it potentially could be. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Now I'll call Ms. Titus for 5 minutes of questions. Ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses. I'll just start with a question to Mr. Russo. You know that TCOs are diversifying their revenue sources. You know it better than anybody. And one of the things they're doing is turning to resource extraction and wildlife trafficking. These illegal actions not only harm our wildlife species and our environment, but they've also led to an increase in violence as environmental conservationists who attempt to stop poachers have been attacked and killed in some instances. Last Congress, I had a bill that passed that was called the Rescuing Animals with Rewards Act, and it made wildlife trafficking part of the State Department's whistleblower program. And it goes a long way towards combating trafficking. I'm glad that we have it, but we need to stop this method of illicit funding and financing when criminals try to bring these animals across our borders. And I just wonder what you're doing to disrupt this kind of supply chain, as it were, and how you can try to help protect our wildlife and also our environment and the people who are engaged in protecting those two things themselves.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We work very well with Fish and Wildlife at the ports of entry to really look at that specific threat. When we encounter any of these animals that come across, we are quick to turn to Fish and Wildlife to investigate all of these threats and working with HSI as well. The threats, as you say, they come far and wide, and they all lead back to these transnational organized crime syndicates. And our job is really to take each single one of these cases and work it from cradle to grave. So that's what we're doing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate hearing that. I would ask to both of you, so often the people who migrate here, come up through Central America and Mexico, are really victims of the lawless and violent activities of these organizations. And I know you work with community-based organizations that have some direct experience dealing with these victims, but I wonder if you engage at all with migrants themselves, especially women, to find out how you can better understand their experiences and how you can collaborate with local NGOs or civic organizations to try to deal with the problem and help these victims, maybe even before they get on the road.
So, Congresswoman, we obviously encounter and engage with all of these poor migrants coming across, and we understand the struggles that they face. We do interview them, and we talk to them at length to understand what it is that they're dealing with, but also to understand how it is that these TCOs are operating. We think that by engaging with them and talking to them more and more, we can help them more and help dismantle these TCOs. The migrants are taken care of by us. We have medical contractors that we've employed throughout the facilities on the southwest border, including trauma care for them as well, and so that's part of our efforts going forward.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Condon, you want to add to that?
Similar to what Mr. Russo said, obviously, Mr. Russo encounters more of these folks in the border, and what we do is, if we were similarly to encounter these folks, On the Interior, we would follow the same in post-arrest interviews and ensure that their care and safety was adequately taken care of, and work with our local state health officials and police officials to ensure, all their needs were met, and should there be victims of violence or coercion and, forced labor and things like that nature.
Hey, I would think that would be important for human trafficking as well. It's kind of like neighborhood policing. If you feel comfortable talking to law enforcement, you're much more likely to give them some information that could be helpful to keep the whole neighborhood safe. I would think that these migrants, if they feel like they can trust you, they'd be able to give you some pretty good information you could use to help address the problem.
That's correct, Congresswoman. And when these individuals, understand that they've been taken advantage of, they're happy to talk to us.
Great.
Thank you, Ms. Titus.
Thank you. Now yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now you call on Mr. Bishop for 5 minutes of questions, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, you have a way of putting things sometimes. I've noticed that a number of occasions. And you asked a question a moment ago of the witnesses about whether the efforts to interdict or to counter the cartels are a drop in the bucket. Mr. Russo, I was struck, I hadn't had a chance to read your statement beforehand. I was struck by what you said about the cartel. I've always wondered, I've heard about cartels earning tremendous revenues from the flow of migrants across the border. And so I looked at your figure, I pulled the statement, and I just wanted, it bears emphasis. And so what's in your statement is it's estimated that cartels profit anywhere between $200 million and $2.3 billion alone for smuggling migrants from the Northern Triangle to the southwestern border. And you cited a RAND Corporation source, I believe, from 2019, and I don't know whether there's quite a big range. I would assume that revenue is in proportion to the flow, right? So the more people that come, the more the cartels earn, right?
Congressman, that would make sense, but there are a lot of factors that go into those numbers, and that's why
I'm sure.
And that's why the range is so wide.
Yeah.
It really depends.
I was just asking really from that point. I mean, it's a point of obvious agreement, and I think it does make a tremendous amount of sense. You have men and women who are undertaking risks to their lives and working hard to interdict and counter these cartels. Homeland Security Investigations has people who are taking risks to their lives, and you made reference to other people who might cooperate with you being at risk. The American taxpayers carry a tremendous amount of expense for those efforts. But to the point about whether it's a drop in the bucket, if the flow is large enough, those efforts kind of get washed out, don't they? Mr. Russo?
I wouldn't necessarily agree, Congressman. To us, every single one of these cases can help us dismantle a network. And as we work these cases, and especially now as we're working to look at the logistics and the finances behind these groups, every single encounter that we make is an encounter that can help us bring down these networks. And so, obviously, it can seem like a drop in the bucket right now, but as we continue to work together and as we continue to look at the networks behind these smuggling and TCOs, I think we're going to make quite a difference.
Well, I appreciate your spirit and the can-do attitude that you bring to it. But I'd ask you, sir, and I don't say this because I want to demoralize the efforts that you and your men and women bring to this task, either of you in your departments, but I think it bears emphasis because policymakers up here need to hear. If policy is being set in Washington to facilitate huge flows, unprecedented in the last 21 years, flows across the border, does that not demoralize the men and women that pursue your responsibilities? Mr. Russo?
I think the men and women of CBP, and I'm sure I speak for HSI and ICE as well, we're dedicated to doing our job. And it doesn't matter how the volume of the threat for us, it's about doing our job and doing it to the best of our ability.
So if the coyotes are across the Rio Grande, as they're paid $6,000 a pop for migrants coming across, and they're ridiculing and cursing and jeering the CBP borders on our side, you don't think that has an impact on their morale?
It could have an impact, Congressman, but our job remains the same. Our job is to protect the borders and to protect this country.
Well, I admire you, and I particularly admire those line officers and the investigators that you have, sir, Mr. Condon, for the way they persist in the face of misguided policy. I wonder if you have, and so I've got about maybe a chance to ask one more question. I have so many to ask. But I understood along the way that it was anticipated, the Biden administration has been saying that this massive surge we're seeing across the border was going to peter out. It was seasonal, it happens every spring, it was going to stop. Hasn't stopped. Mr. Condon or Mr. Russo, do you have any insight as to why that prediction has turned out not to be correct?
I'll defer to Mr. Russo on the migrant flow and sort of the specific numbers being encountered.
The numbers have not gone down. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the numbers, Congressman. We encountered 188,000 individuals in June. Migration flows, what we've seen over the last 40, 50 years, they really do ebb and flow. And so, with COVID, with natural disasters, those are all push factors that lead to some of these migration issues.
God bless the law enforcement folks that work for the United States of America on behalf under your charge. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Bishop, before I move to our next, Ms. Harshberger, I just wanted to say that you bring up some good issues, which is drop in the bucket, migration flows, patterns, and deterrence. I'm hoping we can have a few more hearings on these issues because one of the things that I have heard over and over again, big push factor is the economy. I mean, over the last few years, Chinese imports of textiles have devastated not only the Carolinas in our country, but they've decimated the economies in Central America. Now with COVID-19, you have these push factors that are continue to push folks. And Mr. Bishop, I tell you, I went to El Paso, but I also went to Tijuana. In El Paso, you have a situation of the migrant children. In Tijuana, you have under Section 42 of the Health Code, deportations of families. And I went in to interview a lot of those families there in the Tijuana or the Mexican side of the border. And it was interesting because they weren't talking 6,000, they were talking 10,000 per family, per smuggling attempt. And a lot of those families had
Inflation, Mr. Chairman, it's inflation.
God, that's hyperinflation, sir. And their comment was, I sold everything I had back home to make the trip. And what they were doing on the Mexican side of the border with help of NGOs, I would say, trying to figure out how to get back home and try to figure out what they were going to go back to do because they had bet everything and had lost. And so a lot of these issues are important because as we talk about U.S. aid to Central America, what it's going to, what it's supposed to do, versus dynamics, and some people would say the border, I'd say the dynamics of the American continent as they continue to unfold. We've got to anticipate what's going on. Right now, it's shocking to see how much money is being made off of smuggling. And it almost seems like it's competing with illegal drugs in terms of profit centers. So to anticipate where they go next, what's the next profit center? Where is this money being invested? And how do we create a deterrent? It's very interesting issues for policymakers. Policies that have to be made based on the facts that you're presenting to us. Don't want to operate up here, pontificate based on philosophy or perspective, but rather let the facts drive the solution. And that's what I like to do, is continue to work with you and try to figure out this whole thing that, I'll be honest with all of us, if we're honest, we only look at south of the border when we see smoke, and we only act when we see fire. This thing has been going on for 50 years. And as long as we don't see it, as long as it stays invisible, you know what? It's not there. and now it's there. And we've got to focus on this for the next couple of decades to figure it out. It's not going to be one easy solution, but a number of solutions designed to implement a public policy designed to stabilize, and I say that, stabilize this continent that right now isn't looking good from a political, Mexico just had the great elections. 100 political candidates were assassinated. Where'd you hear that? Did you read that anywhere? We've got challenges, and I'm hoping, my quick commercial here is we've got a lot of work to do in this committee, and I'm hoping to work with our witnesses. So thank you very much for bringing up those comments. And now I'll turn to Ms. Harsberger for her 5 minutes of comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Correa, and thank you to the witnesses today. We all know this is a huge problem, and I guess one of the concerns that I have is that in a lot of rural areas, especially in Guatemala, there's been chaos because of the pandemic, but it strengthened the narco trafficking in those areas. And as a pharmacist, we see that drugs are coming in unimpeded and the price is going way down. So when you talk to these law enforcement agents, they are it's unbelievably hard to counter some of the things that are happening. But if you live in Guatemala, for God's sakes, even the local governments and the people there, sometimes they become beholden to these people because they have no other choice. And, that just tears the society apart. No wonder they want to migrate to this country. And now I've learned that these Guatemalan authorities are allowing some of these people that live there, the property rights to be violated by taking their land, some of these narco traffickers. And I just wondered, what do you think we can do about that? How can we stabilize that government to keep them from wanting to come over? And it's a bad situation. It's not those people's faults, but we have to step in and say, if we help you, what is it we can do to make things more efficient and to make that government responsible and accountable for what they do?
Congresswoman, we agree with you. From a CBP perspective, the deployment of our agents and officers and intel analysts to Guatemala is a step in the right direction. It's our ability to mentor, train the Guatemalan government officials. We work with their mobile targeting interdiction unit to help them understand about anti-corruption so that they can better, conduct operations in Guatemala. So that's what we're trying to do while we're there.
Yeah. We were at the border with the ranking member down, it was in April, and HSI said, all we want to do is we want to be able to, we don't need more laws. We just want to be able to use the ones we have on the books already. And I guess my question is, how are their hands being tied to where they can't combat what's going over? We found out some of the modalities they use to get these people to come in and shuffle these drugs through social media with TikTok and some of these other things. I mean, it's a travesty that we're not doing something about that. But on your end, what do you see that you're not able to do that you should be doing and you should have the authority to do, sirs?
From the HSI perspective, social media and maybe misinformation on social media is a challenge. It's something that I think many agencies are dealing with, and we are kind of coping with that and developing strategies. But also similar to what Mr. Russo was doing, we work hand in hand with CBP in Central America to eliminate or mitigate much of that corrupt focus, and to work with our vetted teams to try to, again, build that professionalization in order to to keep those threats from coming to the United States. The more and more we do that, the less strain you're going to have on the U.S. law enforcement and its related organizations. So that's the main focus for us. But the challenge for the social media and those types of things, it's a small drop in the bucket, but we are beginning to help train our TCIUs and others on how to combat that social misinformation, how to work more closely in the cyber realm. But it's, again, in the nascent stages. So that would be, that's kind of the main drivers, at least on the international side, to try to push and to try to work and mitigate that further downrange before it gets here to the United States.
Well, you know, in my opinion, and many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, you know, these cartels are the biggest criminal threat to our nation, period. And we have to do more to subdue them. And, you know, closing the border would be a perfect example, and making sure that when we do deliver aid, money, whatever it is to these triangle countries, that we hold them accountable and we have some kind of outcome system set in place, so we know that when we give that in good faith, that they're going to apply it and help those people and make them want to stay there. That's the bottom line. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And Chairman, I yield back.
Marshberger, now, without objection, I'd like to go on a second set of questions if I can. And gentlemen, I'm going to follow up where I left off, which was you're doing the job of finding a needle in a haystack. You've got some great organizations, a lot of work, Project Alpha, Project Sentinel. You've incorporated probably a lot of the work you've done in the past through other agencies. Do you feel you're doing enough to coordinate the resources of Department of Homeland Security so that you can be successful?
Mr. Chairman, you spoke of silos, and I've been in this agency for the better part of 25 years, and I can tell you that we've come a long way. And I speak for ICE as well when I say this, because we work hand in hand. We have over 260 employees who are assigned to task force offices across the nation. They work with the HIDAs, the high-intensity drug trafficking areas. They work with HSI, with the DEA, with the FBI, and all the state and local partners. Those relationships have never been stronger than they are today. We are breaking down those silos. And really, when you look at Operation Sentinel, it's a perfect example of that, because we're not doing this alone. We're working with all of our partners to build these cases. And I just think that we are in a much better place today than we ever were.
Mr. Condon.
Similarly, I would agree with Mr. Russo as well. We again, cradle to the beginning to the end. Just about everything we do is in conjunction with CBP. Just in this day and age of data, analytics, it makes sense, and there's no reason not to. Further, one of the best tools we bring is our border enforcement security task forces. That's recognizing that, you know, these border issues, they go into the interior, they affect a lot of communities, and there's a lot of shared interest. There's the violence that's spawned from some of these things. These smuggling events that create disruptions, opioids that come in through, you know, Asia or through China or through Mexico. At the express consignment hubs, we've initiated border and security task forces in Memphis, Northern Kentucky, and Louisville to try to combat that and bring our state and local partners even into that realm of the opioid issues, and try to show them and help with break down those barriers when they have intelligence to share that directly on the impact of where these illicit things are coming into. Further, with the Border Enforcement Security Task Forces, there are 80 of them around the country, including seaports and airports, and try to bring that similar subset in, so you have everybody in the room. That includes state, local, tribal.
Condon, let me interrupt you a couple of minutes here. Fusion centers. We have one in Orange County. I work very closely with my local sheriff. He's always complaining to us that, you know, he's kind of the stepchild when it comes to resources. When it comes to coordinating, he complains that the federal agencies, it's a one-way street when it comes to sharing information. And I say that to you because I think of the border as one piece of a bigger puzzle. And we cannot overlook the fact that for smuggling, for drugs, for these other elements to be successful, there has to be a connection in the United States. And that means good intel from people working in the community, good intel from folks that are seeing who the drug dealer is, good intel from seeing where things begin to unfold in the United States side. Would you say that we're working enough with these local folks, fusion centers? Fusion centers, as you know, are where the sheriff, the police officer, the FBI agent, some of the others get together, 30 people to try to figure this out at the street level. Question for both of you.
I would say, always there's work to be done. I would say it's better than ever. And I know HSI puts a premium on being responsive to state and local officials. It's really not tolerated. It's not part of our ethos to not work with them, not respond out to their calls, and not to share, more importantly, because that's the only way this works. When you share that information, it's not just to get federal prosecutions, right? Oftentimes it's best to get a state prosecution. Oftentimes there's the crime, the localized violence that really is impactful to human beings, right? That the state and local officials are very well equipped to handle. And the smaller scale has more impact. So we definitely put a premium on that, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So we do focus on that greatly.
Mr. Russo?
Mr. Chairman, when it comes to these cases, we are prosecution agnostic. All we care about is stopping the threat. We'll work with anyone. We do work with everyone. We have countless cases of helping state and locals. I can speak to New York because that's where I most recently worked. The work we did to dismantle MS-13 gangs in New York is just one example of how we work with them.
Thank you very much. I'm out of time, so I'll turn to our ranking member, Mr. Mayor, for 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the second round. I was with Ms. Harshbarger and our ranking member down at the border in April, and it was enlightening to kind of to see the reality of that consequence, but also understanding that flow of individuals is not just it's largely a product on the demand side of those push and pull factors, but on that facilitation side, that there's a very long tail there. I guess my first question to Mr. Russo, in the past several months, has there been, and there are dozens of nationalities represented among those who are seeking to cross the border. We have a very strong, significant majority that are coming from Northern Triangle countries, but also others from Central America, South America, and even farther afield. Have we seen any shifts in those nationalities over the past several months?
Not really. In looking at the numbers, it's pretty much the same as it has been. When you look at the 188,000 encounters that we had last month, there's also a percentage of individuals that are coming across multiple times. So that there's that percentage as well. But in terms of the diversity of it pretty much is the same, the majority being from Mexico.
Okay. And just from the portion that are not from Latin America originally, I know there are some individuals who seek to cross our border who will fly into airports in the region from Africa or from other or from parts of Asia, and then kind of seek that land route to circumvent a lot of our passport security checks. And I'm aware of some of those other activities on that interdiction side, but I guess the broader question, when do those individuals interact with a human trafficking smuggling network? Like, is that communication something that takes place when they're in Latin America, or is there communication prior to your awareness? And maybe Mr.
It
Condon.
depends. It depends, and I'll turn to Assistant Director Condon for a greater answer. But I will tell you that even in Guatemala recently, we encountered 12 Uzbekistan nationals in this latest operation that we ran. So it's happening for sure. But in terms of where they're coming from or where they're encountered, John.
And I guess not just where they're encountered, but just at what point do you assess that they start to get within the protection or the assistance of a TCO?
So depending on where and what part of the region it's counted, sometimes these human smuggling organizations have to interact with 2 to 3 cartels or TCOs, right? Who's in control of each territory, if you will, and oftentimes it's just to diversify their portfolios. TCOs that wouldn't ordinarily be involved in human smuggling now have taken that on as sort of a to expand their business and diversify, right? So. Not to evade the question per se, but it kind of depends on at what point in each process and how much communication they've had. But it's very connected. A lot of times it's the human smuggling organizations that start and initiate that before moving up to different parts of the region.
Well, I've exhausted the majority of my questions, but just, Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate this hearing and I appreciate our witnesses. I think it's essential that we don't wait until we shift to the next thing, right? It was drug trafficking, then it became trafficking of individuals. I don't know to what degree, some of our kind of laws or loosening of regulations in the U.S. have maybe shifted the demand structure a little bit on their revenue streams. But those illicit entities, those organizations, the transnational criminal organizations, they are making money hand over foot. And by the way, those $200 million to $1.2 billion, just to be clear, that's profit. Not revenue, but profit.
can only imagine.
Correct.
Where that money came
profit.
from.
Yeah, not revenue, profit. I mean, you take net present value of a company like that and, you can list it on,
Mr. Mayor, I can only
NASDAQ.
imagine, I mean, that's a lot of assets to be sold somewhere to generate that kind of, the massive transfer of wealth that's going on from the very poor to the criminal organizations is unbelievable. And what is that long-term consequence socially in those Central American countries? Good questions. Thank you very much, sir. Now I'm going to
Chairman.
turn
I'll
to Mr. Bishop for 5 minutes of questions, if you so desire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple more. And I was thinking about what you just said, and I was thinking about Ms. Titus' questions earlier. I guess $2.3 billion of profits have probably paid to set up some other operations like resource extraction and wildlife trafficking. It all is it's how businesses are built, and this is, in a weird sort of way, it's a business. And I don't want to be its logistics arm, which is what I think we've become. Let me ask this. I saw an article, and I'm not sure of what it was quoting from, but it just came out that 50,000 migrants have been released in the United States without a court date. So at some point in time, there was a change in process since the inauguration this year to not put a court date anymore, because they don't show up at court dates, but I guess you get numbers you can't give but so many out. And so they stopped doing that, but they're required to report, migrants are required to report to their local ICE office within 60 days. And I read that 13% have so far shown up. So that's 6,700 have showed up, 16,000 have not and are past the 60-day window to report. That leaves many others, obviously, who are not past the 90 days or 60 days. But is that have you, Mr. And I don't know who would know more about that, Mr. Condon? Perhaps I'll address the question to you, and you can pass it if you wish. But does that sound accurate, and is that a surprise?
Sir, just only because I'm come from the investigations branch,
Yeah.
that's not my bailiwick or area of expertise, but I definitely would like the chance to get back with you on that question if I
Yeah,
could.
Mr. Russo, do you know the answer?
Congressman, I'm sorry. We do not have those numbers, or I don't have those numbers in front of me. So happy to take that back.
You said, Mr. Russo, in answering a question a moment ago, that out of the 188,000 encountered in June, some of those came in multiple times. How many? And I don't know how to ask the question. If it was somebody visiting a website, they call them unique visitors. But how many unique border crossers then among that 188,000?
From what I recall, it's about 104,000 of the 188,000.
Okay. How many of those 104,000? So those were. How many of those 104,000 actually stayed in the United States?
I don't recall the number, but a large percentage of those were returned under Title 42.
You don't have an estimate for the number that remains.
Don't have the number, but it's a high. I remember it's a high.
I know you don't have the number. Do you have an estimate of the number?
I would say about 85%.
Go back. So okay.
Yes.
So 20%, 25% stay. So 25,000 people roughly.
Correct.
Once these individuals are, how are they, the people who stay, how are they transported elsewhere within the United States?
So we coordinate with DHS and with ICE to determine transportation. So
Maybe I'll ask Mr. Condon, how are they transported within the United States?
From
The folks who remained, 25,000 last month, they remained. Where did they go?
again, I would have to defer to our co-branch of ERO just to get those facts and figures for you if I could.
You do not know?
No.
You do not know in general?
As far as how they get transported from,
Yeah.
no, I do not, as far as that process goes.
Okay. I saw a recent article that a law enforcement source within CBP says that ICE Office of Enforcement and Removal Operations will start issuing cell phones with tracking apps in lieu of using ankle monitoring bracelets for whoever that's been appropriate for to date. Is there any truth to that report, Mr. Condon?
Sir, I'm unaware of that, but again, I'll have to get back with you on that one and check with our ERO counterparts on that if I could,
Okay.
please.
Get back to both of us. I'm very interested in that information as well. Thank you.
Are ICE officers still consistently issuing notices to appear?
Similarly, again, I would have to check and get back to you on that with our ERO counterparts for that one. Thank you, sir.
I think I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
A lot of work to do, a lot of questions, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. We'll continue to call on you to help us with some of the facts and try to get a better grasp of the challenge ahead of us and how to best come up with the best public policy to effectively address the challenges. I want to thank you for being here today, for your time. I want to remind the members that if they have any additional questions for the witnesses, to submit them to the witnesses, and I ask the witnesses to respond as quickly as possible. The chair reminds the members that the committee record will remain open for 10 business days, and without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you very much.